Okay, I think they asked me to make up some time here, so we'll try to do that. I've got 10 slides. We'll see if we can move through this pretty quickly. So I've been looking after our smart cities business in Australia for the past 2 years. And in 2015, when there was so much interest in the marketplace, and that's only increased since then, but in 2015, I traveled 42 out of 48 weeks to meet with customers across the country. I didn't do it for the Qantas points. Apologies for anybody here from Qantas, but I didn't do it for the Qantas points, mostly because we were traveling to meet with customers to share with them the ideas around smart cities and what we were seeing as opportunities and challenges. And it's paying off. I think we're starting to see projects coming through, proposals or requests for proposals from customers coming through. It's really a fantastic time to be in this space, and I congratulate the good professor for having organized such an event and capturing what is topical today. So my presentation is slightly different than Des's. I think Des covered off a lot of fantastic data points that I'll have to get his slides to leverage. They were really quite interesting things. But I'm really going to talk about why an open approach to smart cities is particularly relevant to what our customers are trying to achieve. We find that the market itself is moving into this direction. We've open source software and all those kind of phenomenons that we're seeing, but we're also seeing a different paradigm of working through solutions in the industry itself, and it's really about open ecosystems, about partnering with people, not believing that you can do everything by yourselves, but working with people in a proactive fashion to make that happen. So two basic themes to the presentation. The first is how did we get to where we are? And just a couple of points around where IoT is and where it's headed and some of the challenges therein. We'll focus on cities and what they're needing to do and why they're needing to do things, as well as how that ties into the Internet of Things and what's relevant to them from an open approach. So the presentation talks through the ideas of an open architecture, an open platform, and an open ecosystem for some of the things I've just mentioned, but we'll go into those in a bit more detail. So this is actually a slightly old chart, but it's still particularly relevant in that we're still forecasting about 50 billion devices to be connected to the internet by the year 2020. And all that means is the data predictions that Des presented are really coming to pass and challenges therein. Even after the 50 billion devices are connected to the internet, we still have only 3% of the world connected at that stage. That means there's 97% more to be connected in that environment here. So the upside and the potential for instrumentation of factories, of cities, of all environments is quite evident. And we look at why that's taking place, and fundamentally it's about the miniaturization of sensors, the improved compute capability available at the edge to make that happen. And these are just examples of various types of sensors that are available in the marketplace, and they all, interestingly enough, use different types of communications protocols embedded in them. And we'll come back to that theme in just a few minutes. But when you think about this, and you think about the pace of innovation and phenomena like the Candy Crush and people developing innovative platforms like Nest that Google purchased, it really requires a different kind of company to be involved. And this is the basic architecture that we see available for IoT, which is on the left-hand side. You have the devices connecting to a network, so you have that information available to do the analysis into a cloud structure, hopefully, where you have various approaches, or REST API, MQTT, which is mosquito telemetry transport, constraint applications, and even some custom structures. So that data is then analyzed with which to provide insights from the data created. I think Des highlighted perfectly the challenges of gathering all that data and being able to analyze it, whether it's at the edge or in a cloud. It's all somewhat the same problem that you're having. But so as we look at this, devices on one end and applications on the other, it's a pretty standard approach in the industry. And what that means is that a lot of fantastic new companies are coming up. And so this is just a slide of 10 hot internet startups. Adhere Tech builds sensors in pill bottles to ensure that people take their medication. Chewy at the bottom there talks about the use of your face and as your identity for opening up doors at your home or your businesses from an access control perspective. Heap Salon at the bottom there is on the bottom left, focuses on wearables. And so it's not just wearables of a GPS device attached to this so I know where I'm at and my doctor knows where I'm at if anything happens to me. It's actually about doing a whole bunch of diagnostics on the person itself, heart rate monitor, position, if you're running, do you have the proper balance in your stride and stuff. So some things we've seen in science fiction movies are really coming to pass in terms of the ability of the technology to analyze a person's body in detail and pass that information back in. Enlighted is working on smart buildings and smart lighting controls, and not so much from just having a control here that you can set through a web portal, but more importantly, that actually understands the behavior of the people within like a 100-meter radius of that sensor to be able to actually more intelligently control the lights in the building itself. PubNub is a cloud aggregation platform whereby people can send their sensor data to that location and people can harness it. So some really innovative things here. The common characteristics of these organizations are they're usually pre-IPO. They've got some modest funding. They've got smallish teams, let's just say 100 people, a couple of $1 million in sales if they're lucky. Highly disruptive to the industry. Some of the things they're doing, Hipsilon competes with Nike in terms of its sensors that they're putting onto wearables. But they're also high-risk ventures, whatever you want to call it. I think these companies present a lot of opportunities, but they also present a lot of challenges. And so the question is, if you're a mature organization, how do you harness this innovation? How do you tap into it and still maintain your risk profile from an organization perspective? When we think about loading in applications into a production environment for a major enterprise, there's a lot of testing, a lot of rigor, a lot of criteria that has to take place. And so these organizations have to struggle with some of that, is that the clients they're trying to attract want a mature organization to support them, or at least a mature approach. That was a really funny movie, if you remember it. But the summary of this slide, though, is that there's a lot of failure rates in this industry, in IoT. So we have to be very cautious about how reliant we are on the companies that they're producing these things, or at least help mature them to a certain point. So 10 or more dead unicorns. Des mentioned the term unicorn, which references $1 billion valuation for a company before it's become mainstream. IoT uptake in the home will remain slow. Well, that's an interesting one, because all those previous companies I've just described focus on IoT. If they're going to have challenges in the marketplace, they may not be successful in 2-3 years' time. And so we have to keep that in mind as we're providing advice to our city customers about what to do and how to approach it in their environment itself. Machine learning will remain in the trunk. Essentially what that means is some of the intelligence that we expected to, analytics and intelligence discerning from the data, still hasn't reached the point where people are viewing it as necessary to their business itself. So again, the message here is that we have to be careful about how we work with these IoT companies, and we have to be cautious about how we implement those solutions. And it's that fine balance between risk and trying to capture all of this fantastic innovation taking place in the industry. So now we're going to shift just a little bit to what our cities are facing, and then we'll come back to tie that together with the theme of open platforms. Fundamentally, we're having rapid urbanization, people moving to cities to find occupations, find work. I think in developing economies, we see that more prominently, where the people moving into cities, equates to a single city of London every month being created, a new university the size of Ohio State University being built from scratch in China every single month, a new one every month. So again, what that does to cities is cause them to rethink how they're going to do things. They have to find new ways to deliver services to citizens. Sustainability, an important criteria all around. I think we're starting to see climate change taking place in force, and even though my country's administration may not agree with it, it's pretty hard. That was meant as a joke, but it's happening. We have to move forward in advancing in that. And then livability, which is trying to make sure that people have a place where they enjoy living. I live in Sydney, and I have so for the last 15 years, but I'm not sure how much longer that's going to last. It's just so hard to get around from a congestion perspective, and I think this is a problem that most cities have, actually, not just Sydney. It's an intractable problem. It impacts our lives, the way we access services, and the way we access the benefits of living in Sydney. So when we think about IoT as applied to these kind of problems, we have to think about censoring things to make things more efficient. Fundamentally, cities can no longer deliver services the way they have for many years. To have to go into a council to get basic services done is just not going to work anymore. So we have to find new ways of doing it. And it's not just about putting stuff onto your tablet, it's actually providing better better sources of information. I'll just digress and give you a short example. I live in a suburb just north here on the other side of the bridge, and it's a really quiet area, very leafy, about 7 minutes from St. Leonard's train station. I walk my dog about 5 o'clock every morning, about half an hour to an hour, and I see people driving around their cars at 5 in the morning, having come from somewhere in the northern beaches, to find a parking spot at 5 in the morning. And much credit to North Sydney and Willoughby Council that they've actually created parking spots that are 2 hours, 1 hour, and then just free for the whole day, to actually encourage people to drive their cars there and take public transport. But just pity the person has to drive all that distance so early in the morning, trying to find a parking spot, stalking a resident who's moving their car at that time in the morning. So just imagine now that if you could actually know before you got there where the parking spots were, how much life would be better for those 10, 15,000 people who use that suburb as a parking spot before they get into public transport. So again, it's about providing services in new and interesting ways, harnessing the data available through sensors and the like, and delivering new services to citizens. And the same thing applies to how cities manage their own infrastructure. At the end of the day, when you have to have people driving around to determine which lights are broken on the street, that just seems, just not really sensible anymore. You need to do something different. By instrumenting light poles, we can actually understand immediately when something has failed, and so you can better operate and maintain that infrastructure, drive your costs down, and maybe the city actually has money to do other things, more interesting things, rather than operate and maintain physical infrastructure. So there are 5 basic domains, 6 basic domains that cities focus on today because these are the most topical for them and their citizens. It's about lighting. In most cities and states, I think Brooke may still be here, Brooke Dixon, but I think lighting contributes 18 to 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions, street lighting, 18 to 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So as the premiers of every state in Australia talk about becoming carbon neutral, if they're not approaching smart lighting and trying to be more effective in how lighting consumes power, they're not going to achieve that kind of objective. So I think that lighting is obviously very topical, and it's a near-term thing, leveraging the transition to LEDs. Parking, for all the reasons I've just described. I mean, I think we're talking, the example I used there was about people struggling to find a parking spot so they can take public transport. But quite the other phenomenon is that people struggle to find a parking spot to be able to shop. For those of you who haven't done your Christmas shopping, trying to find a parking spot at the shopping mall this time of year is impossible. So you have to make decisions on where are you going to go shopping so you can find a parking spot. It sounds kind of mundane, but we all face it every day. So at the end of the day, parking optimization is really helpful to the businesses within the city as well as the citizen experience. Public safety. I started in this job in January of 2015, and in my travels in 2015, I asked every city, are you focused on safety and security of the citizens? And they said, well, we've got a bank of CCTV cameras and that's sufficient. I think in 2016 they changed the position. I think the view is that we've got the cameras, we actually don't know how to take actions, to do something proactive, to intervene, or actually understand what happened. I think it was this time 2 years back in 2014 that that Muppet went to the Lynn Cafe and did whatever he did. It took the city of Sydney 1,000 hours of video feed to go through that 1,000 hours of video feed to find where he had traveled within the city itself. There has to be a better way. The facial recognition technology available today, there must be a better way to find out where this person started and what they were up to. Traffic management, that's the other corollary to parking, the congestion levels that we're seeing in cities today. And I think we have technologies available today which allow cities to better understand what's happening at each intersection. Not necessarily to do anything dramatic, but just understand that if you're putting on an event, such as a Sydney Festival coming up or Vivid Sydney, this is the implication on traffic. Maybe you should change the pattern of flow to make it easier for people to get in and out of the city. It's not sufficient to just say, George Street is closed. There's got to be different approaches to that problem. Pollution and environment. there are a lot of environmental sensors out there today that provide that kind of indication to us about the environment. And as we think about trying to create a better environment for our children or the future, we need to understand actually what's happening. A very bad example of this, or tragic example, was what happened in Victoria. I think it was the thunderstorms a few weeks back, where the level of ozone created challenges for people who are asthmatic. Again, they had no insight, they had no information. They actually didn't know what was happening to them until they went to the hospital and they determined that was happening. So pollution and environment is a fascinating space. I'm just going to digress one more quick second and share with you a story. Is that if you were to put in, you all walked into this hotel, so you understand the dynamics of the street around it, but if you were to put an environmental sensor on Martin Square, how much area could that environmental sensor sense? The answer is not very much. It's because of all the buildings and the airflows around the buildings. So we're partnering with people, we're seeing people in the industry that actually provide software-based analysis of environmental sensors. And what that means is they take the data from software sensors, apply traffic data, apply meteorological data, and satellite maps to the data to provide more accurate information of the pollution levels in any area. So again, taking a different cut of the problem is something fantastic these IoT startups are doing. That company, for those of you who want to look it up, is called Breezometer, B-R-E-E-Z, meter. We have some free software you can download on your phone. But the software that they sell to cities is mostly focused on helping the city understand the historical data, the trends, and so forth, which is much more analytical. Waste management. Another very simple problem is that how do you gain efficiencies for the city or the environment itself? And so some cities have outsourced a lot of that to people like URM, Viola, and CETA, and Suez Group. And some councils actually manage it themselves. But the overarching criteria is that I want to reduce costs, but I want to maintain the aesthetics. So by putting sensors into bins, we can actually more effectively understand when the bins need to be emptied to make sure they're not overflowing, but also to save costs on that. It's really quite an interesting space. It seems a bit mundane, but everybody I speak to, whether it be universities or cities, are really interested in trying to make that happen because if you're trying to talk about livability, having a beautiful environment is quite important. The challenge we face with city customers, though, is that all of these functions are done in different silos. In the city of Sydney, for instance, and again, not being critical, just observational, is that to talk to the city about smart lighting requires bringing in the Barangaroo Development Authority, the Foreshore Authority, Roads and Maritime Services, and the city itself into one room together to talk about how to make smart lighting possible. So again, cities face a lot of challenges in the fact that they've organized in silos, and major cities even sub-silos, and trying to bring all that information together. So I think we speak about waste management or lighting or parking, and all of those have fantastically interesting solutions, but the cities are looking for a more holistic approach. How do I bring all that information together? And so this is another major challenge the cities face. Is it's not good to just take one small step forward. It's much more important to leverage the technology and leapfrog where they need to get to. And so these are just some thoughts on the challenges that cities face in trying to move forward with the smart city agenda. And the first is choice. I think that trying to make sure they have an ability to choose between different solutions providers and continually be able to have that choice, certainly from a procurement perspective, but more importantly from a risk perspective. The infrastructure is becoming less critical. I think they see the fact that we can convert a physical infrastructure like lighting to a digital infrastructure through sensors and controls means that it's less important for them to operate and manage it. And more cities are realizing that if I can get the infrastructure working well by itself or with some support with sensors, then what I should be focusing on is delivery of services to my citizens to find new ways to engage them. A common theme there is being able to provide new services and new intelligence services to citizens. So their core competencies are shifting, or at least their interest in core competencies shifting towards providing better services for citizens. Innovation, I think just a few years ago, maybe even a year ago, customers were saying, I need to see it here in Australia before I'll use it. Some of you in the room maybe even thought that was necessary. And why does something that's been demonstrated at JP Morgan have to be implemented here locally? In a bank, for instance, when we should just be able to tap into that kind of innovation. So our customers are saying it's no longer relevant that I have innovation demonstrated here. I just need to tap into that network at a local and a global level. I think many of our city customers are now wanting to work together. Budgets are limited. Why not? That makes a lot of sense, that rather than piloting something that's been piloted elsewhere, let's leverage that here. So the capturing of innovation at a local and global level is quite important. Risk, I mentioned all those in IoT startups on the previous slides and some of the challenges they face and the fact that some may no longer be here in 2 years. So now you're a city customer and you have to put yourself in their shoes, and they're saying, you want me to implement that solution, based upon the innovation and the ideas, but I have no assurance or guarantee that you're going to be around in 2 years' time. You can't have your lighting infrastructure held hostage to one of these startups. So I think we have to find new ways to help out in that process. And this will move towards my themes of open systems and open ecosystems. Support. Some of these organizations are 100 people strong. There's no way that they're going to be able to provide 24/7 support for some of their solutions that are sold across the world. So I think that that's an important criteria. Open data. Many of my customers have gone through a journey in just the last 2 years. The first is they want to own all of the data and preserve it and monetize it and seek value from it. But more of them are moving towards the notion that the data is being gathered by the city from the citizens. So we need to actually share the data to allow value to be created for the citizens rather than trying to harness it. So an open data structure, open data model allows a city to tap into application developers and that whole innovation space, actually. Extensible platform, the idea is that if you're launching one set of services, that you don't have to redeploy basic infrastructure time and time after again, that you can implement a to-be-determined set of services over time. Because we don't actually know what the services 3 or 5 years hence will be. And so it's important whatever platform I build is extensible in that regard. And I think security, I'm looking forward to reading that magazine they have in the lobby about Internet of Things and security. And it's obviously very germane. You can't have your infrastructure being hacked and shutting it down. And I think there are a number of examples in Australia where utilities have been hacked. And it's a very frightening kind of thing. And we have to think about city infrastructure in exactly the same way. How do we lock it down, prevent people from sending us bots and malware and so forth, and make sure that I continue to provide services to my citizens. We think about lighting as an important infrastructure. During the day, we don't pay too much attention to the light poles, but imagine if at nighttime you're driving around or you're in the city and all the lights go out, right? I mean, that would be just chaos because pedestrians and cars and so forth rely on that. Citizen engagement, I think more and more I'm sensing and seeing in discussions with customers that the cities are putting the citizen at the middle of their smart city plan. How do I improve the services I deliver to my citizens? And everything has to support that. If it doesn't support that, I'm not interested in doing it. So I think a really important element for cities is, it's very simple actually, they have to get reelected. So you have to show progress and you have to put the citizen at the center of all that. But besides the reelection aspects of it, I find most of the leadership in the cities I speak to are very genuinely interested in making that happen. And we have an opportunity to make that happen as well. So what this means though is that as we think about the intersection of IoT and smart cities and how cities can implement things, we have to think about a new approach. And we'll just highlight for you an example. This is not meant to be a commercial for Cisco, but it just wants to highlight for you an example of how this could be done. And so what we're looking at here is essentially an architecture of an open platform. And there are 4 or 5 important things about it I'll call your attention to. The first of which is that we're using a RESTful API structure. Some of you may know what that means, some of you may not. I'll just quickly explain it to you. It's essentially a database structure. And if you think about an Excel file with columns C, D, E, and F, a smart parking sensor sends the same data to column C, D, E, and F as the next sensor, So we're able to create an environment whereby all smart parking sensors deliver the data that I need as a city to the same columns. What that means is I can actually have multiple sensors in my environment, multiple companies providing sensors in my environment without having to rechange anything else. And so as one parking sensor company succeeds, one might fail, one may get acquired. And how do I continue to provide a relevant service to the cities through that way? So we've created an open interface to allow sensor companies to send information to us. And what that does is make it easy for them. It takes about 4 hours of a database architect to mate with our infrastructure. So that's, again, a very open approach to making that happen. And then at the northbound side, the applications level, it's actually open as well, which means if somebody has a smart parking application, they can use the data from the same structure I've mentioned and decouple the sensor from the application. I think the important thing here is that if you're a citizen and you're using your smartphone application to determine where to go park and how to pay, do you want to have to change your user behavior, every time the city changes this application because the sensor company changed, for instance? So by divorcing the two, we've abstracted from that, and we've allowed the citizen to have a continuously good experience in how they use the applications themselves. The other thing is the level of connectivity. In one of my earlier slides, we talked about different communications protocols, and so we were actually very open to working with Wi-Fi, cellular, 6LoWPAN, LoRa, whatever it happens to be. The thrust of it is let's get the data into the network and make sure we can analyze and provide services. And lastly is the fact that the data is now exposed through an open interface that new companies can develop new services. Just a couple of simple examples. You've got a parking application on your phone that's navigating you to a parking spot, but you're having trouble finding it. What if the lights were to flash on top of the light pole to tell you that that's your spot that you're looking for? You know, so it's, again, we're trying to bring together parking, lighting, and a citizen experience. Waste management and traffic. How many of you have been behind a rubbish vehicle and it stops at every house or every street corner to empty bins? That causes a lot of congestion, but to actually correlate that bit of those bits of data would take a PhD, present company not included, to understand exactly what happened. And they maybe will say at 7:15 in the morning on December 12th, that vehicle caused that amount of congestion. But how about if you were to instantly understand your rubbish vehicles are causing congestion on Monaville Road or whatever, maybe we should change the time your trucks are out there on the road. So again, trying to provide unique insights. So I believe that there's a huge opportunity for innovation to take place at an applications level to bring together cross-domain kind of information flows. And so this is how we've approached the problem, and there's a few other people in the industry who are doing something quite similar, but it's a really important construct. If you're trying to leverage innovation taking place at an exponential rate in IoT, you have to have an open approach to working with those companies and make it easy for them, as well as risk mitigate yourselves for the city itself. The city doesn't care which one of those companies they work with, as long as they've got a solution which is secure, reliable, and consistently supported. So I think this is an interesting approach to it. We've been working on it for about 6 to 7 years, and we've launched it about 3 weeks ago in Barcelona. And John, who represents IBM, and Cisco are represented in the Navigant leaderboard 2 years running as leaders in smart city solutions, primarily because of this, primarily because of the open ecosystem, open architecture, and open platform approach. So what I wanted to do today was just share with you why our city customers need to think about this. They're trying to harness the innovation that's taking place at an IoT level and still get great outcomes for the city and still manage that risk portfolio between innovation and maturity and solutions. Thank you.